So the oldest joke in the book, how did Moses get his morning coffee? He brews it. Hebrews. You can laugh now. Thank you.
There was a coffee place down there on Lancaster Drive, it's called Hebrews.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I went on Wednesday, Paul Ernie gave me a tour of the Spruce Goose, up in McMinnville. And by the way, Jerry, if you want to take your cadets on an outing, the Spruce Goose, set it up with Paul. He'll take you right up into the whole cockpit and everything. It's really, really cool. The reason I bring that up, though, is because in the, both in the lower compartment and then in the cockpit area of the Spruce Goose, there are two coffee machines, like not modern ones, but ones that Howard Hughes himself put in so that he could get his coffee while flying this massive plane, which seemed really strange given the concern they have for weight and all of that. But it seems that he needed his coffee bad enough that he made sure that there were two coffee machines installed.
So given the brevity of the flights.
Oh, that's right.
Bit longer than first day.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Wasn't ready by the time we put it down.
In fact, let me see if I can, since I did that, since I brought it up, now I feel like I have to show you. There they are. So I don't know how well you can see that, but
As percolators?
I guess so. But yeah, you can just barely make out behind there. That's the cockpit of the plane. That's where Howard Hughes sat and his flight engineer and all the testers. And right up there was a coffee machine. So there you have it. In case you wondered what did they drink, now you know. We are looking, all that maybe is a good or not good segue into the topic of Hebrews. I'm going to, for our opening, I'm not going to read from Hebrews because you're going to read all through Hebrews as we go through. So I thought I'd read, there's another passage that kind of talks about some of the same themes, and that's from Philippians chapter 1. And so I'm going to read just verses 3 through, about 6. Paul says this: I thank God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. I'll stop there. And I read that because it's a passage that speaks to us and describes for us perseverance and Christian growth. Come on in. And on the one hand, we know, and we're going to be looking throughout in our worship services throughout the month of February, March, we're going to be looking at the theme of Christian growth. How do we grow? What does that look like? Those sorts of things. But embedded in that is, so there's a call to pursue holiness and to pursue growth, to persevere. But then there's also the assurance that we have that God is the one who brings that about, and God finishes what he starts in our lives. In a lot of ways, you're going to see that that's what the book of Hebrews is about. Hebrews it's very theologically rich. There's a lot of depth there. There's probably ideas and concepts that are really hard for us, 21st century. Most of us, I don't think, or I think all of us do not have Jewish background, I don't think. And so many of the ideas and themes in Hebrews that the author of Hebrews kind of takes for granted are foreign to us. Like if I said, hey, Jesus is a better Melchizedek, you think, huh? But all of those things are the author of Hebrews, his way of encouraging us and motivating us to Christian growth, and maybe more accurately to Christian perseverance. How do we remain strong in our faith and finish strong and not sort of grow weary such that we feel like giving up. That's Hebrews in a nutshell. But as I said, I started with Philippians because it reminds us that ultimately the work of perseverance and Christian growth is something that God himself brings to a conclusion. So we can kind of rest in that assurance as well. All right, with that, let's open in prayer. Father, as we begin a new topic, a new study here in our Sunday school, as we look to the book of Hebrews, we pray that the next couple of months that we will have to study it will be a rich blessing to us. In our time and place, our day and age, we know that remaining strong and persevering is not always so easy, and that way we have a lot in common with those who first read this letter. So encourage us again through the reading and study of this book. May it be a rich blessing to us, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So I thought, actually, Michael, would you close that door, just because for our benefit and probably theirs. I'm curious just overall what your exposure is with Hebrews. How many of you have read it through like multiple times, kind of like it's one of your favorite books of the New Testament? Okay, a couple of you, sort of, yeah. How many of you are like, you're really not familiar and you find it a little off, not off-putting in a bad way, but just kind of like intimidating? I'll be honest, that's kind of where I land when, Greg, when you first like did Hebrews, I was a mixture of like excitement, but also like, oh, it's kind of an intimidating book, at least for me, because of all these other theological themes that are a little more challenging than, say, the book of Philippians or even the book of Romans. So how many of you land kind of in that, oh, it's just me, all right. Anyone really consider themselves just unfamiliar and really unaware of what's in Hebrews even? No? Okay, all right. So that's good. Then I have to work my enthusiasm up a little bit to match yours. So if you had to summarize, kind of based on maybe what I've already said or based on your familiarity with the book of Hebrews, what is the book about? What are some of the themes that emerge that you're aware of?
So like the identity of Jesus.
Identity of Jesus is a really big one. Yeah, Adrian, what else?
Christianity Hall of Fame.
Christianity Hall of Fame. You're probably thinking of Hebrews 11, right? That famous chapter of which it goes, all we sometimes call it the Hall of Fame, like you just referenced, of faith heroes of the Christian faith. Yep, that's probably one of the most famous chapters, I think, in Hebrews. What else? Anything else? David, you got something, then Sheila?
Christ the better sacrifice, Christ the better priest.
Yeah, exactly. So I called this class, I thought it would be good to call it True and Better, because that theme of Christ the better comes up over and over and over again, where the author says, okay, we have this in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament. We have angels, we have Moses, we have Melchizedek, we have priests, we have Aaron, but now we have something better. Now, the follow-up question for that is why does the author of Hebrews direct us to something better? And I'll come back to you in a second too, Sheila. So why do you think what's his reason for always putting us to something better? He's got a reason for it. What is it? And David, if you know, otherwise anyone else can chime in.
Well, because people were tempted to turn, maybe they're facing persecution or difficulty or discouragement, or tempted to go back to Jewish rituals.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the fear of when living as a Christian becomes difficult in a world that was hostile, very hostile at times to Christians, it's easier just to go back to what was safe, right? Judaism was not a persecuted religion. And so why be a Christian if you can just sort of enjoy all the rituals of Judaism? You still believe in God. You still believe in the Torah. So why not just be content with that? Why make all the fuss about going on with Jesus when that's going to be so costly? So, but the author of Hebrews says, no, we have something better now. So don't go back to what was old. Sheila, you were going to add something as well.
So it's funny that this is all coming with something that's happening. I've been having furnace HVAC problems, okay? And so it's still under warranty, but it's going to cost me the labor. And I'm thinking, why should that be? Because I went and I bought the best system, that is, because it went good, better, best. And I thought, I want the best, right? We all kind of want the best. And I think from the very beginning, it was good, better, and best.
Yes.
You know, God gave us,
Yeah, good.
God gave us that, you know, the sacrifice. And, you know, even in God saying to Cain, you know, Abel has the best sacrifice. Wasn't that yours isn't good, but that Abel had the best sacrifice. And it was, of course, we know to understand that it is, you know, it was the heart of Cain that God was displeased with. But anyway, when you look at Hebrews, we have the best mediator.
Right,
We
yeah,
have the best mediator.
right. And what, I like how what you said in that, when God gave the priesthood, when he gave the sacrifices, when he gave, you know, Moses, it's not that he was giving something and then kind of looked at it and said, you know, kind of like when you upgrade your phone, it's like they invent all these new features and say, well, now you don't need the other one because we've got, this is a little cooler. And God, his plan all along was to provide Christ, and all these other things lead to Christ. And so these are, you know, in other words, it's why go back to the shadows when you have the substance. It's not, hey, you've upgraded your phone, so don't just take a discounted old version. And it's, all the other things are pointing to Christ, and they find their fulfillment there. So don't go back to the shadow when you have the substance. How many of you, I'm not quite sure exactly how to ask this, but how many of you can think of an example that'd be worth sharing about maybe in your own life or maybe in someone you know who struggled to persevere in the Christian faith? In other words, sometimes maybe you found adversity or challenges and it was, maybe you felt like it'd be easier to just drift away from what you've known and believed. Anyone want to, again, I know that's a little personal, but anyone have an example or a story kind of along those lines where you find it difficult to persevere? Yeah, sure.
This is not myself, but family members who in, you know, university setting or other areas just, you know, started going towards more of a, you know, liberal faith and then kind of just followed that off the exit ramp sort of.
Yeah, right. That's a good example because I think it resonates with many of us. Many of us probably know people who, yeah, it's not that they all of a sudden necessarily have one big theological crisis. It's just kind of this gradual drift. It moves away, you know, towards, well, you know, did Jesus really do all the miracles? Whatever, and it's the off-ramp. I like how you put that because that's exactly what it is. And probably, if you've got kids, you know, grandkids, that's a concern you probably carry for them, that they won't go down that road, that off-ramp of faith. You want them to remain strong. If you've raised them in the faith, you want them to stay in the faith. Hebrews is about that. Hebrews speaks to that. Yeah, Greg.
My grandfather, who was a pastor, went through about a 15 or 20 year, I'll just use wilderness, because he left the ministry. And just, I think he was bitter over some things, I don't know, but it took him from the early 50s until the late 60s, and then, you know, he got reestablished, and he ended up pastoring small churches later in his life. It was just a real...
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So my grandfather went similar, maybe not identical, but similar thing. It kind of just prompts it in my mind where he was pastoring a small church up in central British Columbia, and he was kind of thinking to himself, you know, the sermons that I'm preaching aren't really making a difference in the lives of the people hearing it. You know, they've got addictions, and they've got, you know, dysfunctional families, and they come to church and they hear these nice messages that I'm preaching, him being him, and it's not changing him. So he went to college in Pasadena. He went to, can't think of the name of it right now, doesn't tip my tongue. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. He went to, Pepperdine. It was a college at the time. And he went there and he got a degree in marriage and family. But in that process, he began struggling with alcohol addiction. And over time, then he drifted away into unbelief and you know, all these sort of nebulous spiritual practices that are really very New Age influence. I'm not sure that he ever really fully made it back to, like you're saying, your grandfather kind of went through a 15-year wilderness, but it sounds like God brought him back. when my grandfather died, he was 76. I don't know where he stood with the Lord at that time, but I often think of that as an example of that drift, that off-ramp that Jaron described, that just kind of slow, gradual, and then before you know it, you've fallen away. It's a very real issue, I think, in our culture. We face, Western Europe has gone down this road. Canada has gone quite a ways down this road as well. Secularizing of the culture, rationalism that has kind of given way to this, emotionalism that has pulled us away and said, really, anything, it says either faith is implausible or it's irrational, so don't believe in a higher power, and or if you do have faith, really it should be faith in self and faith in feeling, faith in emotion, but faith in, an objective reality called God is, it's not really, it's silly to believe all of that. So a little bit of I thought it'd be fun to dig into some background stuff. Well, fun is maybe not the right word because it's kind of sobering to look at these numbers. You can go on Pew Research and find a lot of this stuff. I find it interesting. They publish their surveys and their studies all for free. You probably could subscribe to a premium version of it, but I think it's always instructive to look at where things are, not only where they are, but where they're going in terms of public life and religion. Obviously, with any survey, you always have to be a little bit thoughtful about methodology, and surveys don't tell everything, and stats don't tell the full story, and so I kind of put that up front so that you're obviously aware, but they do tell a pretty good story. And so here's a couple things. So this is since 2020, so 5 years. That's not a real long period of time. But it shows, so on the one hand you might say, well, this is good news, because it shows that the decline is not very significant. These are those who identify with Christianity, so those who, and they have criteria for that. They judge, do you believe that the Bible, do you believe in God, do you believe in Jesus, some of the key tenets. So they don't just ask, are you a Christian? They kind of flesh that out. But those who identify as Christians, the numbers dropped 2% from 64 to 62. Now that's not a huge drop. Statistically, that's almost within the margin of error, which means that you almost can basically just say it's flat. And those who identify as nuns, not habit-wearing, but nun, N-O-N-E, those who identify with no religion have stayed essentially static. That number hasn't changed at all. And neither has those who identify with other religion. Now when you expand that timeline out, so when you do like 15 years or 20 years, it shows a pretty marked decline over time. There's some evidence that it's actually will be getting better. It's hard to say, it's hard to predict. And keep in mind, this is the United States, and that's important because in terms of Christian growth, the United States, this sounds cynical, but God is doing great things in other parts of the world in terms of the growth of the church. In Africa, the Southern Hemisphere, South America, Asia, the church is growing. Christianity is spreading very, very quickly there, but not in the United States. You can kind of see it's remained about static. So what about Oregon? We are not a very religious state, as you can tell. We are 46th overall in terms of religious identification. And again, they ask, these are the questions they ask: is religion important in your life? Do they attend services at least monthly? Do you pray daily? Do you say there is God or a universal spirit with absolute? Do you believe that with absolute certainty? Yeah, Greg.
I grew up hearing all the time that Oregon was the least church state in the union. Now, that says we've grown.
Yeah, so we made some progress. Now, when you look at one of these, we're 49th say they pray daily. We're almost at the bottom there. But we're not real high. Now, I'm curious if anyone would know where is the least churched state or the least religious state. And by the way, we're tied for 46 too. So, But anyone have a guess as to where you'd go to find number 50? Or actually, it's 51 because they count DC as
Hawaii?
Nope.
Alaska,
No, it's not Alaska. It's not Hawaii.
DC,
Nope. DC's close, but it's not DC.
California.
No. Nope. Surprisingly so. California has enough pockets of religiosity. It's New England. Yeah, it's Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine. They're all really close. They're very... Now that's interesting because if you go to New England, of course, you've seen the picturesque little scenes. It's very pretty. There's churches all over the place, right? There's a long history of, faith and engagement, but the churches there tended to be congregationalist. The theological rooting there historically has not been as strong. Like my grandfather mentioned, was part of the United Church of Canada, which is a very progressive church, although with some Reformed roots. But the roots don't go very deep, but that's the same in like New England. Anyone know which is number one for the most religious? Anyone want to guess?
Utah?
No, it's not Utah, surprisingly. Because you're right, it doesn't measure actually Christianity versus Mormonism. It just says those categories. But it's not Utah, it's not Tennessee. Any other guesses?
Texas.
No, not Texas.
Alabama.
You're really close, but it's not Alberta. No,
Mississippi.
Mississippi. Mississippi is number one. Yeah, you're running, that's right, it's by process of elimination. So, but it gives you a little hint, I mean, in terms of, where we're at religiously. Now, I'm guessing that none of this is a shock to anyone in this room, because you know what religion is like in Oregon. Strangely, I think you'll find a lot of people who have sort of traces of religiosity even in Oregon. Like, I think I don't want to oversell it, but I think you'd find a lot of people who do kind of have some openness to spirituality, but that level of spirituality doesn't match any of these things. Like, I think you'd have people who are open to, like, angels, for example. We're going to see that in a little bit, because the first thing the author of Hebrews does is he says, well, let's talk about angels, and so I did a little digging on that. So lots of people do believe in angels and supernatural beings, and when death, I've told this story before, but a friend of mine, not a believer, was raised in the church but left it a long time ago. So he's pretty, and we've had some really good conversations, but he really clearly does not have any faith in God or the Bible or religion. In fact, he doesn't have a lot of appreciation for it. But when his father died a few years ago, he asked me to do the service, and so I agreed to do that for him. And he was the MC of the service, but I did a meditation. But I caught him saying at some point in the service, well, we know Dad is up in a better place now, looking down on us. And it wasn't the time or place, but I wanted to call him out on that and say, hey, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? You reject the faith, and then you kind of hold on to it in the face of death. It's like, you can't have it both ways. Yeah, Michael.
I'm curious about the percentages. I'm curious because a long time ago somewhere I heard that maybe 3% of Japanese are religious like we, the people in this room, are religious, and the rest of it's sort of nominal.
Yeah.
97% of them would be cultural, and they identify it that way. And in Japan, religion is an identity issue.
Right,
So
okay.
you can't discriminate on religion because you're born Buddhist or you're born Shinto, you can't mess with that. Somehow, to me, the American statistics feel like that.
I think,
So, when it feels like somehow that's a cultural identity issue,
Yeah.
and it's not, would those people all be allowed to be members of a church in good standing, whatever you want to say? Because I'm having a hard time believing there's that percentage of people who would attend, as opposed to the statistic they would cite in Japan would be, how many people are attending, for example, an evangelical church on Sunday morning in Japan? Give me the percentage of people.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think you're right. I mean, I think certainly in the United States, there's a large segment in which Christianity is a cultural thing. It's sort of culturally appropriate to be identified with a church. There's a long history in the United States of identification. We, of course, one nation under God. So there's this long history of religious identification, specifically with evangelical-ish Christianity, and I use that term very loosely. So yes, there is that pressure. Now, there's some evidence to suggest that cultural pressure is changing, that it's actually becoming, which is to say, it's becoming more culturally acceptable, and even in some circles culturally honored to not identify with the Christian faith and Christian tradition, because then you're the enlightened ones. You've not been brainwashed by all that religious stuff. That's changing. However, I still think that again they can. Like say religion is very important in their lives. Well, that's a marker that I think puts you a little bit beyond, is it just a cultural thing? And do you pray regularly? That one to me, or pray daily, that one to me can go either way. But you're right, I mean, and that's the challenge with numbers, is it can measure behaviors, but it's a lot harder to measure an inward transformation. You can ask questions like, have you been born again?
Yeah, I guess I was speaking probably, unfortunately, to the previous slide with statistics of people in church, maybe even one before.
Yeah.
You have the higher percentages, like that one doesn't.
Yeah.
But I get the next one, about Oregon, yeah, those are practices, those are ways.
Right.
It's not asking which religion, it's.
Right, just asking
sort of
religiosity.
something.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I have a great answer to it other than to say that, yeah, you're right, some of this is no doubt informed by cultural identification and cultural Christianity. You see that especially, be careful here a little bit, but within the last 10 years, there's been this resurgence of, Christian nationalism. You have to define that, and, but there's an example of it, and yeah, it is a thing. David, you're going to say something.
Yeah, in fact, that kind of ties to one of the points I wanted to make, is that you go back 70 years or so, there wasn't a Christian nationalism. You had "In God We Trust." I mean that was a Cold War thing. That wasn't
That was not a
founding
fathers
back
thing.
150 years ago.
Right, that was Eisenhower.
And it was people in mainline churches usually, and exactly how theologically people were in church, how theologically orthodox they might have been or not. It's hard to say.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, of course, a warning against.
And another survey, Ligonier Ministries occasionally sponsors a survey, and they actually get down to the theological beliefs of self-identified evangelicals, which tends to be discouraging.
That's if you want to be kind of in a bad mood, read that. Now, because they ask questions. They ask questions about, is Jesus really the Son of God, or was he a good teacher? And the number that says, yeah, he was just a good teacher among professing Christians and evangelicals is really high, which is a bad thing, right? So yeah, when they try to measure the depth of theological knowledge, it's discouraging. Christianity Today, in the January-February issue, did an article about that. And they kind of cite some of those statistics, which is interesting. Now, I'll give you some good news. There is really encouraging signs that there's been a resurgence in people reading their Bibles. And the better news, that's good news, but even better is that it's being led by millennials. So younger generation, for whatever reason, are increased. There seems to be maybe the sign that there's this enthusiasm for reading the Bible among millennials. Yeah, Adrian.
And I'd like to add in Charlie Kirk story. He definitely spiked things up a little bit.
Yes, that's true. He did. So when you get these national events, Charlie Kirk's killing being one of them, 9/11 being out, there is a spike in religious interest, and Charlie Kirk, with his identification with Christianity, certainly drove some of that. Okay, a little bit more now to the question of perseverance within the faith. So in other words, if you've been raised in the faith, what does it look like in terms of remaining connected to your faith? And this is, I guess I take this as a little bit discouraging, because only 56% say they identify with the religion that they were raised in. Yeah.
Do you know what they mean by religion? Because I've seen the surveys, and if you're Protestant, you're one religion, and if you're Orthodox Christian, you're another religion.
Oh, let me see here. This is, I believe this is, I'm not certain, but I believe it's any religion.
Okay.
So it would include Christians, but it would also include like Muslim, Buddhist, etc. And this is
what I meant is, if I go from Christian Reform
to
Baptist, have I changed my religion?
I don't think so. I think it's just measuring. Yeah. So that I'm not certain about, but I think it's Christianity, Buddhist. I think it's broad. I think. I don't think on this one they were getting down into the details, except to look at the people who left, why did they leave? So I think 56% identify with the religion that they were raised in. Now you can extrapolate from that, knowing that, again, the numbers of those who are, Christianity, you can say that this is probably majority of those who are born into the Christian faith and remain Christian, although I don't think it's exclusively. So 56%, that means that, 44% do not stay with the faith that they were raised in. So, yeah, Sheila.
So, I have to get this straight in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would identify with the 56%. The fact that my only difference is that I still have a religion,
Mm-hmm.
but I do not identify with my childhood religion.
Yeah.
And so that becomes very, very specific, I
Right.
mean, I would have to say our greatest example of that would be Paul. Paul did not identify with his,
Right,
with his religion.
And I think,
and-
I think in the terms of this survey, Paul would say it was a switch too.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
Judaism to Christianity is how you put
Right,
it. Now, again, I don't, like in your story, I know a little bit of your story.
Right.
If you were raised in a Christian tradition, but let's say it was very legalistic
Right.
and moralistic,
Right.
and then you find a church that's more gospel-centered, gospel-focused, in our minds, that's a significant, that's even a conversion experience. In the metrics of the survey, it might not count as a change because you're still part of a Christian tradition. So you're all identifying sort of the limits of
Right.
statistics and numbers and surveys. But I do want you to look left, so of the 35 who switch, it kind of breaks it down. They left the religion, 20% leave for nothing. So they walk away from religion altogether. That's a pretty high number of those that switch. And then 10% left their childhood, but they stayed religion. Only 3% were not raised religious and then became religious. That's pretty low. Like that, I think, speaks maybe something about, how do we view missions and how do we view outreach? Like that's a pretty low number. What it suggests, I think, is that the Christian church in the United States grows not so much through witness and evangelism as much as propagation. Now that's not a bad thing. I mean, you have children and you raise them in the faith, that's a good thing, but it might identify that maybe there's a lot of work to be done in terms of outreach and evangelism. Jerry?
So on the other side of the coin, though, the promise of baptism.
Yeah, right, and I don't want to undermine that because when we baptize children, that is a way that the kingdom of God grows. So please don't take my comment to mean that doesn't matter, because it does. That is, I think, hugely important. I think that's one of the ways that the church does grow. But I think that does not need to happen at the expense of, which I know you're not saying that, but it shouldn't happen at the expense of mission and outreach. And I do sometimes wonder if maybe that's, and if we're really honest, maybe that's one of the weaknesses of the Reformed tradition is that if we're not careful, we just focus on, let's grow the covenant through, birth and baptism, and do less about witness and outreach and evangelism. Just an observation, there's maybe debate around that, but that's just kind of been my thing. 9% had no religion as children have no religion now. So they were raised without religion and stayed without religion. So a couple of reasons. So the question then becomes, well, why do people leave their childhood religion? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just they stopped believing in the religion's teachings. It just wasn't important. Gradually drifted away. You can see, the big one by a fairly large margin is stop believing the teachings. In other words, it was a theological or intellectual disagreement or difference that became such that they just no longer believed it. Yeah, right.
One of my early memories, I started to go similar after high school graduation, and I was involved in a discussion in the middle of a hallway one day with a kid that had been raised Baptist, and he said something that has always stuck with me. He says, I'm coming here I'm paraphrasing now, to essentially unlearn everything I was taught.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting that was, because
Yeah.
we know that university life is not necessarily.
Right. Yeah, and that's sad, because they're like to Jerry's point earlier, in baptism, we make this commitment to raise and teach our children the truths and the essentials of the Christian faith, the hope of the gospel, the promises of God, and then to just say, oh, I want to get rid of all that, it's just sad, right? But it's common. I would say if you look at number 3 in the list, I gradually drifted away. That was kind of the off-ramp that Jaron was describing earlier. It's just this kind of progressive drift away from it. And it's not like you necessarily wake up one morning and say, oh, I don't believe this anymore. It's just life drift away. I would also point out a couple of things. The number of these that involve relevance. In other words, it just wasn't important to my life, or my spiritual needs not being met, or my religion was out of date, suggests that maybe one of the causes has to do with the perception that Christianity, or other religions as well, but Christianity has no bearing on how we live day-to-day life and the challenges that we face when we're at work or with our friends or at school or wherever. And then the other one is, the other theme is, like scandals and teaching on social political issues. That's maybe relevance, but also like the scandals one is always one that bothers me, because it's totally understandable in one way, right? We all know the stories of faith leaders who, we look up to or admire, and then it turns out that they, behind the scenes, were living a whole separate life. And some very, very well-known names in the last couple of years have come forward or have been identified, and that always is, because it's hard. How do you, as Christians, how do we respond to that? I mean, I have a response, but it's tough. Yeah, Jerry.
Well, interestingly, people don't switch political parties if there's huge scandals.
Some do, though. I think. I mean, you're right. That's true. Although I would say that is one of the reasons that people do leave their party that they identify with. Although for some people the loyalty is such that they clearly don't, when they maybe even should. But yeah, it's interesting to compare that. Any other thoughts on this?
Well, some of these bigger churches with scandals, the church is built around a leader, and
right.
It almost comes to the point where they're like almost worshiping the leader,
Right. It's a huge caution against
not God himself,
not charismatic leadership, but charismatic leaders and the sort of platforming of leaders at the expense of, elevating Christ. That happens too often, hate to keep picking on guys like Mark Driscoll and James MacDonald, but those were very big personalities that attracted a lot of attention, and then it turns out they were, they almost, for some, they were put on a platform they could do no wrong, and that's unfortunate. So, Sheila.
I have a very good friend who no longer lives in Oregon, but I got to know her and her husband through a banking relationship, and then knowing we were both believers. So anyway, her husband died exactly to the day 6 months before my husband passed away. And so we made it, until she moved to Colorado, we made it a monthly time of getting together and just sharing. And so in her sharing, she had shared with me that for years, she stayed with a husband who was very heavily involved in pornography online, and they would go from one church to another church, and because he wouldn't get help. And as soon as somebody found out about his sin, they would go to another church. So anyway, last night we had this conversation, and I had shared, we were talking about because the interesting thing going back is the night before he had a massive heart attack. She told him, I can't live this way anymore, I have to get a divorce.
Yeah. Wow.
And he passed away in his teenage daughter's arms, while they were waiting for the ambulance. And so all kinds of different things have happened in the unfolding of what came out of the closet, okay?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so last night we were talking about, and we all know this probably, about Philip Yancey.
Yeah.
And that he had hidden this for so many years. But he, but he confessed to his wife, and his wife obviously is traumatized that she has chosen to stay with him and to forgive him because of that commitment that they had made 50-some years ago. And it was interesting because some of the response was, sure, of course he would come back to his wife because he has Parkinson's and needs someone to take care of him. And it's just like, we don't understand that.
Right.
In the same way that we don't understand how, as Jerry is saying, how somebody can stand behind somebody so scandalous that's representing the United States of America. But it's amazing that even in these surveys, it gives us the opportunity. Because, I'll tell you, I have a son that has walked away and just says, will you still love me, Mom, if I don't believe in anything that I was taught? And I said, of course, that's basically what evangelism and what sharing. I said, as long as you allow me to share my love for Jesus, It is a difficult position, but the bottom thing that I think that God is calling us to is sit down and understand them. Sit down and listen to what they're saying.
Right.
Because this is happening within families that just as the political thing has split families up. And many times it's because of the way we stand by, I'm a Republican regardless, or Democrats, I will never vote Democrat. You can't be a Christian and vote Democrat. We have to understand that in all of this, we have to give them we have to be a listening place, and we have to give them a chance to.
That goes a long ways today. I think that is, excuse me, I think that is important. We've lost that old dictum, you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics,
Right.
and we've lived that way for a long time. Well, now we're paying the dividends of that, we're reaping the fruit of that, I should say, because now we don't know how to talk about religion, we don't know how to talk about politics, unfortunately. Okay, we're going to wrap it up here. What does all this have to do with Hebrews? Well, if you are able, do one of two things by next week. Read Hebrews 1, verses 1 to 3. You were all able to do that. It's 3 verses. You can do that way for church. So, here's the harder one, though, but it's more beneficial, but it's more time-consuming, and not everyone's going to be able to do it. If you're able, though, sit down and listen to the whole book of Hebrews in one setting. So listen to it, read it, however you read. Try to do it in one setting. You're not going to go deaf here, but the point is just to pay attention, read through the whole book, 13 chapters, and just pay attention to what are some of the big themes that start to come out. And maybe that will connect to some of the things we've talked about today. All right. So either read 1 to 3, chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, or if you're able, put it on your podcast, listen to it, read it. Probably would take about 30 to 40 minutes to skim through the whole thing. Again, don't focus on depth. Don't worry, you're not going to understand everything, but try to read through the whole thing and get some sense of the overall big idea. Let me close in prayer, and then we'll pick up next week with a kind of an introduction to the book itself. Father, thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you that when we look at statistics that maybe even if they don't tell the full story, they do raise enough concerns that we should be paying attention. Concerns about a culture that has drifted away and in some cases even just is hostile in terms of its rejection of Christianity. Most of us in this room know people and care about people that have maybe even experienced this. And so for some of us, this isn't just an abstract idea, but it's a very personal one. So as we move into the study of Hebrews, encourage us and remind us that you are faithful and that we can always look to you and trust in you to finish the work that you start. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.